Hello, my name is Alex Sutton. I am a designer and architecture graduate from London, and I guess I'm going to bring a little bit of disruptive innovation and speculation to this part of the panel discussions and presentations. Just before I get on to the projects I'm going to talk about, I just thought I'd just recap on a few points which I think that I feel are important to me about air travel and airports. Obviously, we've discussed that air travel demand is going to increase by more than double in the next 20 years, which is a crazy amount considering it's an industry that hasn't been around for that long, and we're already going to be increasing by double. And I guess this idea of that cities are starting to play a very important role, or should I say the airports are starting to play an important role on cities, such as, for example, on the left we've got Memphis, which is the where FedEx is operated, and you can see that the industrial zones around the airport are much larger than, say, the traditional city centre up at the top. Amsterdam, which is in itself, I guess, an aerotropolis model, and its connections to not just Amsterdam, but the rest of the Netherlands and countries beyond, as a gateway to Europe, but also as a business destination with companies like Microsoft, for example, operating right in the centre of the Schiphol Triangle. And then I guess you've got cities like Dubai, which have not been around in their current format for very, very long at all. And actually with Dubai Airport, I think the main terminal opening in 2000 or around then, the fact that the city has grown to what it has become and its industry has shifted from oil to tourism would not have been possible without the airport that facilitates it, and it's very quickly surpassing all other airports around the world as a... But for me, I think there's always been this perception of airports as being sort of endless process, endless shopping, endless terminal. And really, we board down these jet bridges, some might have glass, but actually it's really, for me, where is the magic of flight and where has it gone? I think this is a good example with London Stansted, Norman Foster's terminal in London, and the concept that it was supposed to be curbside to airside, sort of around 100 meters, and all of the horrible systems are placed underground, so you don't have to interact with any of it, and it was supposed to be a very seamless, airy transition from landside to airside. But the diagram on the right is how Stansted likes to display its airport now, a sort of intestine of a shopping mall infrastructure that sort of you come out of security, but you can't even escape to the plane. You have to go around this colon, as it were, through this shopping mall, not by choice, and then you end up at access to the gates. But I like also how that the lounge is called Escape. But for me, I think some traditional values of older airports are something that perhaps we could go back and look at. And I flew last week through Berlin-Tegel, and I really enjoy the fact that you arrive by taxi, and just before you've even got into the main airport, you see a screen and it tells you what gate you're supposed to be going to, and that taxi will then drive through under this bridge where the planes are going over, sort of this big drama as you arrive. Wow, look at that. That's what that machine that humans built, this incredible machine, is right in front, and then you come through and then straight to the gate, straight into check-in, straight through security. If anything, the shopping aspect is completely secondary and is in the sort of the smaller, more raised terminal. But I think we've all got to remember, and I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate here, that flight is magical. And I think it's lost its appreciation recently, and people don't really appreciate it for what it is, and it's quite an everyday process. It's something that we all probably take a bit for granted, but the fact that we can fly at all is an amazing achievement. And I liked, back in, sort of 50 years ago, even 40 years ago, people, really enjoying the airport. The airport was a place of celebration. The airport was a place of magic, and people would, it would be a place where actually people would want to come to and watch planes and watch aircraft take off, watch their loved ones leave, and so on. And I guess with this ever expansion of airports and our terminals getting bigger and bigger and bigger, particularly with my hometown, London Heathrow's Airport Terminal 4, when our terminals can't cope with the expansion anymore, we just sort of create nasty architectures that now look like this, where it's like, how many times can you adapt and amend the same building just because it takes hundreds of years to do anything in the UK, so that's why we're also battling with our third runway. And I guess with airports, with the city starting to encroach on the boundaries, is really, it's caused a sort of an isolated pocket, and the city wants to be next to the airport, needs the airport, and the airport wants to expand, but it's sort of this friction that they clash into each other. And with environmental and safety reasons and security, I guess there is this isolation. So I guess we need to ask what's next. Now, what I'm about to discuss might not necessarily be the right answer, but I guess it's, as we're all here and sharing knowledge, I think it's a good opportunity for us all to discuss what is next. And the project I'm about to describe is basically, what if we do put the airport inside the city, and at what point will that happen? I think it's been touched on today that this might become a reality in the future, but I think at what point will it become a reality? And the project I will discuss is a project that uses, I guess, key drivers in technological developments and other developments in the aviation industry, and to see how actually could we start to integrate an airport into the city. And what I've tried to do is create an airport that is a little closer to where we are now, as a way of saying, well, you know, it's got to happen at some point, and when is it that time when we're going to make the plunge and actually let's do it. So this is a project that was called Stockholm Airport City. It was part of a wider research trip that I did with the UCL Bartlett School of Architecture a few years ago. And so that's why it's sited in Stockholm. But Stockholm itself was having an interesting aviation crisis at the time with relations to its city airport, which is right almost in the heart of the city centre, or sort of 4 kilometres just west. And I think they were about to close it. And I think, well, you know, let's be radical. Let's just do a theoretical project and see, well, what was we put the airport in the city, which, of course, most people probably didn't like. But I guess we have to have a few assumptions, and we have to rely on the fact that planes are going to become quieter, they're going to become greener, and the whole operation is going to become much more precise and safer. And so reducing corridors of risk, and I guess autonomous technologies is going to be a huge driver in that. So I'm just going to take you through key points of this project that talks about how could this work or not. But I guess there's a lot of information out there on the internet, particularly, for example, Airbus are already starting to do a lot of speculation and research into what could be coming. And as part of their Smarter Skies vision of 2050, they have a lot of items on there which are quite interesting. And so then if you take those as a designer and then respond to them, what does it mean and how can it reshape the airport? So, for example, this idea of a takeoff carriage in terms of changing the way planes take off and land. New ways of, I guess, of accelerating aircraft, reducing noise in theory, and also reducing the amount of runway that's needed. I think with this assisted takeoff carriage, they're speculating that probably 2/3 of a typical runway is only needed. But I think also looking to other technologies that exist today, like aircraft carriers, which I find fascinating airports in their own right, and the fact that actually the landing strip is so small, and there are obviously systems in place to stop slow planes down and help them speed up. But the amount of precision that is needed to land on an aircraft carrier is incredible. There's no room for error, otherwise you're going to have all your planes into the water, which I'm sure if it ever needs to be at war, is not a good idea. So here we are, we're coming into the city. And what's interesting is that if we start to integrate runways into the city, and obviously imagining the planes are quiet, it's landing on sort of a capture system that reduces the amount of risk and deviation from the runway, say. And we can create an interesting built environment in that actually the airport can start to dictate a sort of topography of the city itself, from high-rise through to low-rise, in order to to create some element of maneuver should something go wrong. But then when we've landed, obviously taxiing today requires a hell of a lot of tarmac. And planes have engines suck air in, blast air out, that's dangerous, makes noise, it's polluting. But also the pilot himself has to control these aircraft moving around these airfields. And there's also the example of a car being blown away as researched on Top Gear. But taxiing is changing, and I think this is an example of an EGTS system that's developed by Honeywell and Safran in order to use electricity as part of the taxiing process, and therefore almost eliminate noise and local pollution in that phase of flight. But if we're using, let's say, like taxiing is going to become autonomous and actually is not going to be sort of human controlled as such, as part of also an efficient operation, why can't, say, a carriage system or some sort of a pulley system start to navigate the plane, therefore, from the runway and around the airport? And so what that could mean is all this land that the airports take up and all of the grassy fields in between could start to become developable land as well, aside from wasted space. So we could start to have built environments that are, potentially a new city demographic that need to be within the airport, and therefore the planes will land and then they'll start to weave their way through the city to a gate that is located within a smaller terminal, which you can see, I'll come to later, but dotted around the master plan. And likewise, this topography that sort of undulates, and therefore it's not all about high-rise, it's not all about low-rise, but actually we get a sort of a mix of building types, which also is sometimes builds to a character of a city. But of course, security is important, and I'm not going to stand here and say that it's solved and it's going to work, but I think we're already having to deal with times when the airport and the outdoor environments start to coexist, and this is a great example of an A380 crossing a highway, I think at Frankfurt Airport. And this obviously requires security, and you need to stop things from getting on the plane. So there is an element of in terms of airport border control. Like, there's nothing to say that someone could pull up in a lorry underneath and just let a bomb off underneath that plane. But we have to deal with it. So, and another great example is Gibraltar Airport, the small British territory in southern Spain, where it's so small and so restricted by its land geography that the airport and access into Gibraltar have to share the same space. And actually, we've got examples when the runway is not in use, we have cars and coaches and people walk across the runway, just like a level crossing for a railway. And then the plane lands, they close the gates, plane lands, there's a security check, and so on. And what I like is when you look out the plane windows, is when I flew last year down there, is that you have people just playing football in football stadiums right on the edge of the runway. And the city and the ships and the cruise ships and terminals and hotels, all on the edge. And I guess London City Airport is another example where planes have to navigate around tall structures, particularly, say, Canary Wharf. So perhaps security, we have to develop a new kind of security, and something that is part of the wider city, and something that protects the citizens, that's also going to protect the airport, and perhaps something that what we learn from the airport security can then be applied to city security. And if we say we're going to have these taxi track systems, what if they are raised up above and create new sort of boulevards, which could have a water system underneath that starts to create sort of more physical barriers to security, rather than a fence and a rolled barbed wire, but actually something that is separating you from the airport to the land, but yet it's still embedded in the same area. And actually the terminal itself will be the facilitator between those different layers. So access will only be provided to the plane if you're cleared security. And I know we've touched on some other security measures, such as this tunnel system as a way of being completely non-invasive way of being processed, but also that passport control as well and immigration is becoming much more like a metro system. You put your passport in as if it's like a ticket and you go straight through, if your visa's okay. But then obviously baggage and check-in is changing, and the fact that we can do everything on our smart devices and get boarding passes on our wrist and is sort of to say, well then what's really the airport terminal starting to mean? What if we can do this all at home? Why apart from the aircraft themselves, are these terminals becoming so big? We can tag our bags at home now, and we can even drop them off at self check-in desks in the terminal. But actually, if we're starting to build airports that become the size of cities in their own right, is this integrating an infrastructure then as a baggage system that could completely operate throughout the city through local kiosks. That means you can pop out of your hotel, drop your bag in a kiosk which screens with security, and then gets taken off on this fully automated system as part of this big machines that already exist in big terminals today, and then gets sorted for you. But this kind of technology or underground system of moving baggage or cargo is something that's not that unusual today. Of course, we have subways for humans. But in London, until not that long ago, we've had the post office railway, which went across London. That was purely for transporting mail through the city of London. And then on the right, we have the interterminal baggage tunnels, for example, at Heathrow. So we can start to use a section of the city and actually have all these baggage systems that are built into the city as part of, say, water mains and sewage and electricity. And therefore, the plane, which is silently gliding through on this track above, is separated from the humans who are ambling along, and even a water canal underneath. And really creates this sort of amphitheatre, and actually trying to start to think, actually, guys, we shouldn't be hiding these planes. These planes are actually pretty cool and pretty amazing, and can become much more accepted into society. But then with all of this, what does it mean for the terminal? And I've always found it interesting as to why planes always sort of park against a terminal. And the turnaround process still seems quite manual, but in a aviation is so about time efficiency and money, and there's a lot of risk to damage to aircraft from moving vehicles, that all of this will eventually have to become fully automated. And actually, sorry, it's a bit faded on this, but could we just start to reinterpret the terminal as actually something that's much smaller, as a micro-terminal, say, where, say, there's only 2 gates, max, and all of the shopping and all of the, say, non-aviation-related aspects are completely removed from this terminal, and this is really just like a glorified metro-style gate. You come in, you clear security, you go up an escalator, and you check your boarding pass, and you're straight on the plane. So this terminal could look something like this, perhaps. And then a baggage system and cargo system and maintenance system that's all part of the gate infrastructure, that is all part of this machine that's now completely embedded into the city. And therefore, these smaller terminals will slot into the urban context in an easier way. And, we could land at the airport, we pop out of the plane, and we can then, within 5 seconds, be enjoying the markets that are so famed by this location. Or, ambling along or sailing along a canal, enjoying the city for what it is, and not actually trying to say, well, how do we bring the culture of where the airport is into the airport, when actually you're coming here, you don't come to Venice to sit at Marco Polo Airport, we come to Venice to enjoy its canals, for example. So could a new type of city start to emerge? And I guess with the urban airport, we got to use mobile technology, and the fact that boarding passes and, say, even city mapper technology can all be part of this process, in saying that actually wherever you are in the city, it doesn't matter, because your phone and all this information technology that's accessible through your hand or your watch is going to tell you that you need to leave right now and go to your nearest station, or walk, or cycle, all these different modes of transport that could take you to the gate. And I'm quite interested in these kinds of creatures. The PRT technology and driverless cars is going to become a thing of the future, and actually this could play an important role in processing passengers and security, in that it's your own little vehicle that, if you say have a boarding pass, you can have scanned it at its own mini terminus or station, and then it's granted you a certain way of access to, say, one of these micro terminals. Which it's more personal, and it means that it can facilitate just city people or the people of traveling through the airport. And so this is so the PRT system could then sort of navigate across the whole city. You arrive into your terminal and you jump straight on it. The baggage system then would complement that. So where you have PRT stations, you could drop your baggage. And therefore, in city squares, you jump on a station, drop your bag, and the planes would all be going around, and it's sort of all accepted as part of this. And therefore, green spaces could emerge, parks, walkways. I like this idea that you could walk to the airport, which is something that's not so common today. And even as we're in why not, as we're in Venice waterways and so on. So really, you arrive at this terminal, there's a layer of sort of transport hub underneath that's all automated, and you just rise up with the plane always in view up the side, celebrating the plane. And then could it be that actually, rather than having restriction and isolation, we have an airport that perhaps expands itself organically through with the city as and when is necessary? Of course, this is all possibly quite theoretical, but I think there's no harm in having a bit of speculation and trying to be informed about it. So thank you very much.